I found out when the loan officer stopped smiling. He had been polite, routine, almost bored. Then he leaned closer to his screen, frowned slightly, and said, "There must be some mistake." I felt my stomach tighten. What kind of mistake? He turned the monitor toward me. "According to our records, you're already on an active mortgage, $420,000, opened 3 years ago." 3 years ago. I was 26 now. 3 years ago, I was 23, living in a one-bedroom apartment, eating instant noodles because rent came first. "I've never owned a house," I said. He didn't answer. He just printed the documents. When he handed me the signature page, my hands were steady. That's the part I remember most. They were steady. The signature looked like mine. Same looping M, same sharp K at the end. But it wasn't mine. It was careful, practiced, like someone had studied it. The borrower listed above my name was my father. That was the moment something quiet inside me shifted. Not shock, not rage, recognition. If you've ever realized someone you trusted made a decision for you without you, you know that feeling. And if this story touches something personal, tell me where you're listening from. I read those comments more than you think. I was the responsible daughter. That's what my parents always said. When I was 8, my father would hand me the grocery list and let me calculate the total before we reached the register. "You're good with numbers," he'd tell the cashier proudly. When I was 10, I translated bank letters for them. I learned words like interest rate before I understood what betrayal meant. Being useful felt like love. At 16, I filled out scholarship applications alone at the kitchen table, while my parents argued softly in the next room about overdue bills. At 18, I left for college on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. My parents didn't come to drop me off. They said gas was expensive. I told myself they were practical. I told myself I understood. I always understood. That was my role. At 23, I started working at a compliance firm. Entry-level position, long hours, modest pay. I was proud of myself, quietly proud. I didn't ask my parents for anything. Not money, not help, not approval. We spoke on holidays, occasionally on Sundays. They would mention how hard things were, how the housing market was unstable, how their small contracting business wasn't what it used to be. I listened. I sympathized. But I never imagined they would solve their problem by attaching my name to it. When I drove to their house that evening after leaving the bank, the driveway looked the same. The faded basketball hoop, the cracked concrete I once tripped on at 12. My father opened the door before I knocked twice. He looked irritated, not guilty. "What is this about embarrassing us at the bank?" he asked. I blinked. "Embarrassing you? You went in there asking questions." My heart thudded once. "You put me on a mortgage." He didn't flinch. "It's temporary." "You forged my signature." "It's paperwork," he snapped. "You're not paying it." Not paying it. That word choice stayed with me. Not yet. I stepped inside without being invited. The living room smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. My mother stood near the kitchen doorway, arms folded. "We were going to tell you," she said. "When?" Silence. My father sighed heavily, like I was the inconvenience. "The bank said adding you would secure better terms. Your credit is excellent." You. Not we. Not can we ask. Just you. "Why didn't you ask me?" My mother's voice tightened. "Because you overreact." I almost laughed. Overreact? I was standing in the house I grew up in, legally tied to a debt larger than anything I had ever owned, and I was overreacting? You used my social security number. We raised you, my father said sharply, after everything we sacrificed. There it was, the ledger, parenting as debt. I looked at him carefully. This wasn't panic in his eyes. It was justification. He truly believed this was acceptable. You signed my name, I said quietly. It's family, he replied. That word landed heavier than any accusation. Family, meaning you don't get a choice. I walked through the hallway toward my old bedroom. The walls were repainted, the closet empty. My childhood had been cleared out, just like my consent. When I returned to the living room, my mother avoided my eyes. It's not like we stole money from you, she said softly. I held up the document I printed. You stole my identity. For the first time, my father's expression flickered. Not remorse, fear. Don't make this bigger than it is, he warned. I realized something then. He wasn't afraid of hurting me. He was afraid of consequences. And suddenly the room felt smaller, like the walls were pressing inward. I had spent my entire life being the reasonable one, the understanding one, the daughter who adjusted. But standing there, holding proof that my own parents had signed my name to a $420,000 obligation without telling me, something inside me hardened. Not anger, clarity. If I said nothing, this would continue. If I accepted it, I would carry it. If I protected them, I would damage myself. I met my father's eyes. This isn't temporary. This is fraud. The word hung between us. My mother inhaled sharply. You wouldn't. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. And for the first time in my life, I didn't answer immediately. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying, not because I was panicking, but because my mind kept replaying one sentence over and over. You wouldn't. My mother had said it like she knew me better than I knew myself, like my identity was predictable, like I would bend as always. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering being 11 years old, overhearing them argue about money. My father had said, "Don't worry, she'll help when she's older. She's responsible." Back then, it sounded like hope. Now it sounded like a plan. By morning, my decision wasn't emotional anymore. It was procedural. I returned to the bank at 9:03 a.m. Same building, same neutral gray walls, same faint smell of carpet cleaner. But this time, I wasn't applying for a condo loan. I asked to speak to the loan officer privately. He looked concerned when I sat down. "Did you talk to your family?" "Yes," I said, "and I need to file a fraud affidavit." He paused. "Are you sure?" That question felt heavier than the paperwork, because once I said yes, it would no longer be a family disagreement. It would be documentation, evidence, consequences. "I'm sure," I said. He led me to a smaller office. The fraud investigator joined us 15 minutes later. Mid-40s, calm eyes, efficient. She didn't react dramatically when I explained. She just asked structured questions. "Did you sign the mortgage documents?" "No." "Did you give verbal consent?" "No." "Have you ever granted them power of attorney?" "No." Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard. "Are you aware that filing this may trigger a formal investigation?" "Yes." "Are you prepared for that?" There it was again. Prepared. I thought about my father's face when I used the word fraud. I thought about my mother saying, "You wouldn't." And I thought about my future, my credit, my independence, my ability to buy my own home. I signed the affidavit. The pen felt heavier than it should have. When I walked out of the bank, my phone buzzed. My mother. I let it ring. Then my father. Then 3 more missed calls. I didn't respond until that evening. When I did, it wasn't to explain, it was to inform. I filed a fraud report. Silence. Then my father's voice, low and controlled. You've just destroyed this family. Destroyed, like the structure had been stable before. You put me on a mortgage without telling me. It was to help us. You forged my signature. You're not paying it. That word again, not paying, as if the only harm was financial. I said, you risked my credit, my legal standing. It's paperwork, he snapped. Do you even understand how hard things have been for us? There it was, the pivot, victimhood. I swallowed. I do understand. That's why I'm not pressing charges, yet. The line went quiet. Yet. I didn't plan to send them to jail, but I needed them to understand this wasn't invisible. You wouldn't ruin us over this, my mother whispered when she took the phone. Ruin. Another word placed on my shoulders. I'm not ruining you, I said calmly. I'm protecting myself. She started crying softly. Not hysterical, just enough. I thought you were stronger than this. Stronger, meaning more silent. That sentence did something inside me, because strength had always meant endurance in our house, enduring criticism, enduring pressure, enduring responsibility. But maybe strength wasn't absorbing damage, maybe it was refusing it. The next week was quiet, too quiet. Then the bank contacted them formally. That's when things shifted. My father called again, but this time his voice wasn't angry, it was tight. They're talking about federal charges. I leaned back in my chair at work, staring at the city skyline through the window. This could be handled privately, he continued quickly. We can refinance, remove your name. Why didn't you do that before I found out? Silence. Because I wasn't supposed to find out. That truth hovered between us. They're freezing the account, he said. Do you understand what that means? Yes. It meant pressure. It meant scrutiny. It meant he was no longer in control. You're overreacting, he tried again, but the confidence was thinner now. No, I said quietly. I'm reacting exactly once. He exhaled sharply. You've changed. Maybe, or maybe I just stopped playing the role. The fraud investigator called me the following day. They've admitted you did not sign the documents, she said. Admitted. The word felt surreal. They're requesting an opportunity to resolve this through refinancing and formal removal. Formal removal. On paper. In writing. With accountability. It was the first time since discovering the mortgage that I felt something steady inside my chest. Not relief. Balance. I scheduled a consultation with an attorney that afternoon, not because I wanted escalation, but because I wanted structure. I was done handling this emotionally. This needed to be precise, measured, and irreversible. When I told my parents I was meeting a lawyer, my mother's voice cracked. You're taking this too far. Too far. That phrase followed me into childhood. Too far when I cried too long. Too far when I asked too many questions. Too far when I wanted more. Maybe too far just meant inconvenient. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said. I know, she replied softly, and for the first time since this began, she sounded unsure, not defensive, not certain, just unsure, which meant something had shifted, not in the mortgage, in the power. The attorney's office was quiet. Not the dramatic kind of quiet, not marble floors and towering ceilings, just soft lighting, neutral walls, a small potted plant in the corner that had clearly survived longer than most people's patience. Her name was Danielle. She didn't ask if I loved my parents. She didn't ask if this was hard. She asked for documents. When I handed her the mortgage copy, she scanned it slowly. "They refinanced twice," she said. I blinked. "Twice?" She nodded and turned the page toward me. "There's an equity adjustment here, and another here." The dates blurred. They hadn't just added my name, they had leveraged it, used my income projection from an old tax return I once emailed my mother for FAFSA paperwork. That realization didn't explode inside me, it sank. Deep, quiet, planned, not impulsive, not desperate in the moment, planned. "You understand what this means," Danielle said carefully. "Yes," I replied. "It means this wasn't accidental." She folded her hands. "You have options: criminal charges, civil suit, or negotiated removal with written admission." Written admission. Something about that felt heavier than charges. Paper doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten, it simply records. "What happens if I press charges?" I asked. "They could face felony fraud." The word felony hovered in the room like smoke. I imagined my father standing in a courtroom, not angry, not proud, just older, smaller. The image didn't satisfy me. It didn't heal anything. "I don't want them in prison," I said. Danielle nodded. "Then we negotiate. But you must understand, once you let this go without documentation, it can happen again." That sentence landed clean. It can happen again. I had spent most of my life assuming intentions mattered more than patterns. Maybe they didn't. We drafted terms, clear, structured. They would refinance solely under their names. They would submit a notarized statement acknowledging unauthorized use of my identity. They would cover legal and administrative fees. In return, I would not pursue criminal charges. Danielle read the document aloud once before printing. Every sentence felt like a boundary in ink. When I handed the proposal to my parents 3 days later, we met at a cafe halfway between my apartment and their house, neutral ground. My father looked exhausted, not defeated, but strained. My mother didn't remove her sunglasses indoors. He read the first page slowly, then the second. His jaw tightened. "You hired a lawyer," he said quietly. "Yes. You're making this formal." It already was. He looked at the clause about written admission. "I'm not signing something that makes me a criminal. It acknowledges what happened," I said evenly. "It was a misunderstanding." "No," I replied. "It wasn't anger that made my voice steady. It was exhaustion. You copied my signature. You submitted my social security number. You refinanced twice." My mother finally spoke. "We were drowning," she whispered. The words weren't manipulative, they were tired. The first honest sentence I'd heard in weeks. "And you didn't think to ask me?" I said softly. She removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were red. "We knew you'd say no." There it was again. Not because I was selfish, because I had limits. That truth hung in the air between us. My father pushed the papers back toward me. "You're punishing us." "No," I said. "I'm protecting myself." He stared at me for a long moment. I saw something flicker in his expression. Not rage, not control, recognition. He was realizing something uncomfortable. I wasn't a child anymore, and I wasn't afraid of documentation. "You always were the strong one," he muttered. The compliment felt hollow. Strength had always meant endurance in our family. Enduring silence, enduring pressure, enduring sacrifice. But this was different. This was refusal. "I need this in writing," I said calmly. and I need the refinance initiated within 30 days. My mother inhaled sharply. You'd really let the bank move forward otherwise? Yes. There was no threat in my voice, just fact. We sat there in silence for a full minute. People around us sipped coffee, laughed softly, lived normal lives. My father finally picked up the pen. His hand hesitated above the signature line. For a split second, I remembered being 9 years old, watching that same hand guide mine when I learned cursive at the kitchen table. He had said, "Press harder, make it clear." Now he pressed hard, too hard. The ink almost tore the paper. He signed. My mother signed next. When they pushed the papers back toward me, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, not triumphant, not relieved, just steady. Something had shifted, not in the mortgage, in the hierarchy. For the first time in my life, I wasn't absorbing the fallout. I was defining the terms. As we stood to leave, my father said quietly, "You've changed." I met his eyes. "No," I replied. "I just stopped pretending this was normal." And as I walked back to my car, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I wasn't second-guessing. I was calm, not because it didn't hurt, but because it finally made sense.
The refinance process took longer than anyone expected. Banks move slowly when they're calm. They move even slower when fraud has been involved. For weeks, I received updates from Danielle and the bank's fraud department. Every email subject line made my chest tighten slightly. Documentation received, verification pending, underwriting review. My parents stopped calling. Not dramatically. Not with anger, just silence. That silence felt heavier than the shouting. I went to work, I answered emails, I attended compliance meetings where we discussed regulatory safeguards and identity protection policies. The irony didn't escape me. I spent my days helping companies prevent the exact thing my own parents had done to me. One afternoon, while reviewing client documentation, I caught myself staring at a signature longer than necessary. The loops, the pressure, the subtle slant. I used to think handwriting was personality. Now I understood it could also be imitation. The fraud investigator called 3 weeks in. "They've initiated the refinance," she said, "but there's a problem." My stomach tightened. What kind of problem? Their income isn't qualifying without a co-borrower. Of course it wasn't. That was the entire reason they had used me. They're asking if you'd reconsider staying on temporarily. I actually laughed. It surprised both of us. No. There was no hesitation in my voice, no guilt, just no. The investigator didn't push. "Understood," she said. "We'll proceed accordingly." That night, my father called. I let it ring once before answering. "They won't approve it without you," he said immediately. "They will," I replied calmly. "You may have to sell." The word sell landed between us like something fragile. "This is our home," my mother's voice appeared in the background. "It was my home once too. You should have thought about that before adding me without asking," I said quietly. "You're being cruel," my father said. Cruel. The word almost made me pause, because growing up, cruel meant raised voices, it meant disrespect, it meant rebellion. But this was paperwork. "You made a decision for me," I said. "Now I'm making one for myself." Silence. Then something unexpected. "I was scared," my father said. His voice wasn't angry. It was stripped down. The business was collapsing. The house value was dropping. I couldn't let us lose everything. For a moment, I pictured him at the kitchen table late at night, calculator in hand, bills stacked, pride pressing down heavier than numbers. Fear. It wasn't malice. It was fear wrapped in entitlement. "You could have asked me." He didn't respond, because he knew the answer. I would have said no, and he couldn't tolerate that. The refinance dragged on for another month. Eventually, the bank approved a restructuring at a higher rate. Not ideal, not comfortable, but independent. The official removal paperwork arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday afternoon. I stared at the envelope longer than necessary. My name was typed cleanly across the front. No forged loops, no imitation. Inside was the notarized admission, clear language. We acknowledge that our daughter did not authorize the use of her identity in the mortgage application dated, stamped, signed. It felt surreal reading my parents describe what they had done in formal terms. No emotional defense, no justification, just fact. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quieter than I expected. For so many weeks, everything had been loud. Phone calls, accusations, guilt. Now it was just paper. I placed the document in a folder and slid it into my desk drawer. Not to hide it, but to close it. That evening, my mother texted, "We signed everything. I hope you're happy." Happy, the word felt misplaced. "I'm relieved," I replied. She didn't respond. Days passed, then weeks. No calls, no Sunday check-ins, no holiday plans. It was as if removing my name from the mortgage had removed me from the family. That realization hurt more than the fraud, because fraud was action. This was absence. One Saturday morning, while cleaning my apartment, I found an old childhood photo tucked inside a book. I was 9, standing between my parents, smiling, my father's hand resting on my shoulder. I studied his expression, protective, proud, or maybe just hopeful. I wondered when the shift happened, when love became leverage, when support became expectation. I sat on the edge of my bed holding that photo longer than I meant to, not grieving the house, not grieving the mortgage, grieving the version of us that existed before paperwork complicated everything. But here's what I understood now. They hadn't stopped loving me. They had just prioritized survival over consent. And I had finally prioritized myself. The silence between us stretched, not violent, not explosive, just real. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the bridge holding everything together, and the world didn't collapse.
The first time I signed my own mortgage papers, I didn't rush it. The loan officer slid the stack toward me and smiled politely, the way they do when it's just another closing on their calendar. But it wasn't just paperwork to me. It was a boundary in ink. I read every line, every clause, every number. No one else's name appeared on the page. No co-borrower, no silent attachment, just mine. When I signed, my hand didn't tremble. It moved the way it had when I signed the fraud affidavit months earlier, steady, deliberate. Only this time, it wasn't about protection, it was about ownership. The condo wasn't large, it wasn't dramatic. 2 bedrooms, wide windows, a small balcony that overlooked a quiet stretch of trees instead of traffic. But it was mine, fully. After closing, I sat alone on the empty hardwood floor with my back against the wall and let the silence settle around me. Not the heavy silence from my parents, not the defensive quiet after arguments, just stillness. I thought about the girl who once believed being useful meant being loved, the one who translated bank letters at 10 years old, the one who filled out scholarship forms alone, the one who believed that if she was responsible enough, careful enough, strong enough, she could keep everything from breaking. I didn't realize then that sometimes the breaking is necessary. The distance between my parents and me never exploded into something dramatic. There was no final screaming match, no slammed doors, just fewer calls, then none. At first, I waited. Not desperately, just habitually. Sunday afternoons felt strange without my mother asking about work or my father complaining about politics. But over time, I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't bracing anymore. I wasn't anticipating subtle guilt. I wasn't calculating how to respond in ways that kept the peace. Peace didn't need managing anymore. About 3 months after the refinance was finalized, my father sent a short message. "We're managing." That was it. No apology, no attempt to rewrite history, just that. I read it twice. Managing. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't hostility either. It was neutral. And neutral felt honest. I responded with something equally simple. "I'm glad." There are people who will say I should have forgiven faster, that family means endurance, that blood demands patience. But here's what I learned. Forgiveness without accountability is just permission, and love without consent becomes control. I didn't press charges. I didn't humiliate them publicly. I didn't tell extended family the full story. I simply required documentation. That was my boundary. And boundaries are not punishments. They are lines that say, this far, no further. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had said nothing, if I had absorbed the mortgage quietly, if I had told myself it was temporary, if I had continued being the responsible one at the cost of myself. Maybe the debt would have followed me for decades. Maybe resentment would have hardened into something irreversible. Instead, what we have now is space. Uncomfortable space, but honest space. A few weeks ago, I visited my new condo after work and found myself standing by the balcony window as the sun dipped behind the trees. The light was soft, warm. For the first time in a long time, my chest felt light in a way that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I thought about my father at that cafe table, pressing his signature so hard it nearly tore the paper, and I understood something clearly. He hadn't expected me to stop protecting him. He had expected me to endure. The shift wasn't in the mortgage. It was in my willingness to carry what wasn't mine. That's what changed everything. I don't hate my parents. I don't sit here burning with revenge. I understand fear now in a way I didn't before. Fear makes people justify decisions they once would have condemned. But understanding doesn't require surrender. I can love them from a distance. I can wish them stability. I can even hope one day we speak again without tension. But I will never again sign something I didn't choose. And I will never confuse silence with strength. If this story felt personal to you, tell me what boundary you had to set. Thank you for listening.